Hello everyone and welcome to a most wonderful game that was suggested to me via email by a username Yovbar10, and it's a brilliant game from the 1965 USSR Championship. It was played in Tallinn in Estonia, and it features Vladas Mikenas and of course David Bronstein, who needs no introduction on this channel, I hope. But a few words about Vladas Mikenas. He played chess pretty much his entire life, originally from Estonia himself. He won the 1930 Estonian Championship. Then he immigrated to Lithuania, where he won the 1936 Lithuanian Championship. And well, he had a very productive chess career. Like I said, played chess his entire life. In 1937, he even drew a game against Alexander Alechin, who was the world champion. Maybe it was in that part where Alechin lost the World Chess Championship to Max Euwe, but you know, regardless, it was still I mean, Alexander Alechin. Definitely a strong player. That's what I wanted to tell you. And he continued playing. For example, this is a game from 1965, and he's been playing since the 30s. And well, just an incredibly strong player that played chess his entire life, which is very important for this game, as he's playing David Bronstein, who is one of those players that everyone agrees that is probably the strongest player who never became world champion, as this is said of many players. Like they say this about Paul Keres, they say this about Vasily Vanchuk, they say this about, well, there just are these players that are so strong but never really got a crack at the title. Okay, David Bronstein did get a crack at the title, and he was very close to winning it, but he never quite did. At some point, I do hope to make like a very short Bronstein saga, as he was not a world champion, so maybe not an extensive one, but yeah. Hope I will be able to do one. So getting back to this game, it's really awesome, as it features the old Indian defense that Bronstein is playing, and well, he just shows how even though it's not considered the main weapon, it can still be used you know, to a good cause, and it has some perks that, for example, the King's Indian defense doesn't have. You don't have the g6 pawn, well, the g pawn on g6, so white can't really advance his h pawn and take advantage of your weakness. But you'll see what happens in this game, so let's dive straight into it. So Mikenas has the white pieces, and he opens with d4. We have knight to f6 by Bronstein, c4, sorry about that, and d6. By Bronstein, we have knight to c3 and now d6. This is the c6. This is the Czech variation of the old Indian defense. We have e4. Mikenas grabs the full center, and now e5. And of course, even though you could trade here, no one ever does this, because after captures, yes, okay, you can trade queens. For example, queen captures on d8, and you you know, take away black's castling privileges, but it doesn't matter. If anyone is better here, it's black. So instead, just d5 here, we grab more space in the center, bishop to e7, and now bishop to e2. We have castles here, and knight to f3. And here Bronstein plays knight to a6. You could play knight to d7, Bronstein puts it on a6. He says later on it's gonna be put to c5. Also, it prevents white from rapidly expanding with b4, and well, once white makes his intentions clear, we will probably play knight to c5, and it will come with tempo. This knight is already attacking the e4 pawn, so white will not be in time to chase away our knight with b4. Well, white castles here, and the bishop to d7. And here white says, all right, Bronstein is doing something very slow here, and it's very odd. He has a knight on a6, so I'm gonna play knight to e1, and I'm gonna start opening up the position with f4. And interestingly, as of move 9, knight to e1, it was that this position never happened again. So here, how do you continue development as black here? Well, Bronstein plays queen to c8, and this is such a powerful move in the position that we really need to remember when playing our own games, because usually when you're playing a chess game, you know that okay, there are these general squares where the knight belongs. You know that the knights belong on maybe f6 and c6. You know that the bishops should be on d7 and e7, unless they're fianchettoed on g7 and b7. You know, you want to bring the rooks into the game, maybe c8, d8, rook, this comes to e8 or d8. But Bronstein has a different idea. This bishop came from f8 to e7, and now Bronstein, by moving the queen to c8, he's preparing this maneuver. Bishop to e7 to d8 and then to b6, and then the dark square bishop that is not doing all that much here will be a very strong bishop here on this diagonal. So this is Bronstein's plan. And while maybe a modern master would go something like king to h1 right away, Mikenas first starts with knight to d3, now preparing f4, and bishop to d8. Bronstein continues his plan. We have f4. Mikenas also says, all right, you do your thing, I'm going to do mine. And now c captures on d5 first. We have a trade in the center, and now knight to c5. This is the idea that Bronstein had. Now white is not in time to chase away the knight, as the e4 pawn is hanging. So the knight was only placed on a6 temporarily. And if you trade here, for example, knight captures, we're going to play queen captures on c5, and not much is happening here for white. If king h1, we can even play queen to d4, and now it's black who's dictating the tone of the battle. So instead, after this knight to c5, you could maybe defend it with knight to f2, okay, add a defender here, but instead we just have f captures on e5. So forcing the trade, knight c captures on, knight f captures on e4, knight captures on e4, we have knight captures on e4, and now bishop to e3. Mikenas develops the bishop here, and now comes bishop to b6. And I believe this is the move that Bronstein is most proud of in this game, even though you guys will probably think it's a different one. But bishop to b6, just an incredibly powerful move, because Bronstein has a very active knight on e4. And now, how do you defend the bishop on e3? You can't play queen d2, the knight covers that, there's no way to move the bishop. You can't play queen to c1 because we just trade, queen captures, rook captures, and then we pick up a free bishop. So the only thing white can do here is to trade dark square bishops, and this means that Bronstein now gets the open a file, or rather the semi-open a file for his rook. So bishop captures on b6, a captures on b6, and now we have rook to f4, trying to get rid of this knight from this very active square. But now Bronstein plays knight to c5. He says this is a small combination to take control of the dark squares. And now, how can white continue here? Well, if you trade here, then again, just queen captures on c5 check, king e1, and we're going to capture on e5, and black is just much better here. So instead, after knight to c5, Mikenas grabs the pawn on d6, and now comes Bronstein's idea. Knight captures on d3, queen captures on d3, and now queen to c5 with check. And okay, you might think, well, why should white have played king to h1 in the first place when he can just move the king, you know, with tempo when he's being checked? But most of the times that's not how chess works. King to h1, we have queen captures on d6 now, attacking the rook here, and here rook to h4. Now Mikenas moves the rook away from harm's way and also threatens checkmate on h7. So h6, Bronstein defends this by also creating some breathing room for his king, and he says this is a very important aspect of this game, as the black king has a breathing some breathing room to lean on to, and the white king does not, now that king to h1 has been played. And how do you get this rook into the game? You really can't, because the a2 pawn is hanging. So white absolutely has to waste a move to play something like pawn to a3. This is exactly what Mikenas does. Now comes rook f to e8, putting pressure on the bishop, but also putting a rook on the open e file, and bishop to f3. This is a great square for the bishop. We put more defense to the d5 pawn, and now comes queen to e5. And this is an extremely poisonous move by Bronstein. You can see that some of the threats are very visible. You can see that white's back rank is very weak, and you have this queen to e1 idea. We're going to sacrifice the queen, and if rook captures, we're going to deliver checkmate. For the moment, this is not possible, because the queen can also defend with queen to f1. But there are not all that many great moves white can play here. So what you could do, for example, if you play something like rook to b1, then it's a problem. Then queen to e1 definitely will result in a loss, because if you play queen to f1 now the problem is the rook on h4 is hanging. So the back rank checkmate isn't your only problem. So rook to b1 can't really be played. The only thing you can play here is queen to d4, and rook to d4, but for a very specific reason. If you play queen to d4, queen to e1, then you can retreat with queen to g4, for example, queen to d4. And now, of course, if queen to e1 with check, we first capture the queen, and after rook captures, now we block with queen to g1, and we survive the attack. there's not all that much black can claim here to be advantageous for him. And another thing, we can play rook to d4. That also will work for us, because if now queen to e1, we can play queen to f1, and now there's no rook on h4 hanging, so we've defended well. However, in the game, Mikenas played rook to b4. He said, as my b2 pawn was hanging, let's just defend the pawn, and let's also just get the rook away from the h4 square, because that's the problem pretty much in all of these combinations. The combination of the back rank mate with queen to e1 in addition to the rook being on h4, this is what will be white's ruin. However, he misses one very important thing here, and it's one that makes this game well, just spectacular, and this is probably the move you guys will enjoy the most, even though I still think bishop to b6 was Bronstein's favorite move of the game. But feel free to pause the video here and try to find this absolutely crushing idea Bronstein played here while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as you are a true spotter of X-raying moves. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook captures on a3. This one, I believe, deserves to be played out in slow motion. Let's do this. Rook captures on a3. And believe it or not, it was in this position on move 24 that Vladas Mikenas resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Even though the rook can be captured with the pawn, with the white rook, and with the white queen, none of it works. Because now, of course, you can see that if the pawn captures, then the rook on a1 is hanging. And that's a big deal, as that rook was supposed to help white defend the back rank mate. And now, even after rook to b1, blocking check, we play rook to e1 with check. And now, after rook captures, we're going to play queen captures, queen to f1, queen captures on f1 will be checkmate. So capturing with the pawn doesn't really work. Capturing with the rook also doesn't really make much sense, because we've removed one of the defenders from the back rank. After queen f1, this will be checkmate. And of course, after rook captures on a3, there's only one thing left, and that is queen captures. But now we just give up the queen, queen to e1 check, rook captures, and rook captures on e1. So really, really a spectacular game. Thank you so much for suggesting such a brilliancy. But like I said, I mean, if I had to show Bronstein games for like an entire year, I would be a very happy person, and I'm pretty sure you guys wouldn't mind. So you can see how back rank issues are a huge problem. Like I said, Bronstein had the h6 played. His king had an escape square if you know, the position took a wrong turn for him, but white did not. After king to h1, there was no square for the white king, and this this attacking move that white played, this rook to h4 to threaten checkmate, was the, well, basically the tool that allowed Bronstein to combine not only the idea of the back rank mate, but also the idea of attacking the b2 pawn, but also the idea that a rook captures on a3 was an idea, because the rook on a1 was hanging. And I mean, it's just what to say. This is one brilliant game. So really hope you guys enjoyed it, and that you will well, appreciate Bronstein a little bit more, because I know you guys really appreciate him. He's such a spectacular player. I should do more videos on him, definitely. And I did promise you that we will continue the saga on his well, famous tournament book, the Zurich tournament of 1953. But we'll get to that, no worries. So that's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and that you've learned something. You know, not just because it's called the Old Indian Defense doesn't mean it's bad. I would like to thank Dave Ellis, Pratameshekar Mahajan, USFDEFRI, and Nicolas Padal for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions, such as this one, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.